Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Simple Money Guys podcast, where we make money simple for you. I'm Greg, and as always, I'll be joined by John and Ryan. Join us for this episode today as we discuss some of the most essential money tips that will allow you to take full control of your financial future. Hey, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Simple Money Guys podcast, where we make money simple for you. How are you guys doing?
Doing great, Greg. How are you doing?
Doing all right. At the time of recording, it is November 5th. We are amid a crazy election. I guess whatever time you guys are listening, we may have known the results, but
we still don't know. We still
don't know at this time, which is crazy.
Very crazy.
It's been 3 days, so we might not find out till next week.
But in today's episode, we have some great content planned for all of you. We're going to be talking about debt, maybe a little bit of assets. Should we start by introducing what the difference between an asset and liability or debt is? Ryan, do you want to start by explaining like a balance sheet, your own personal balance sheet? I know in last week you were talking about your net worth.
So an asset is just anything that you own that has value. A liability is anything that you owe, so like debt. So the difference between those is your net worth. So net worth is assets minus liabilities. And so if you have a lot of debt and no assets, you have a negative net worth. If you have a lot of assets and no debt, you have a high net worth. So that's kind of the general principle behind it. Obviously, we want to strive to have no debt and a lot of assets, and that's kind of the goal and principles that we're going to try to teach in this podcast.
Yeah, I think some of the most common forms of assets that people obviously have are cash, whether it be, cash you have on hand, money in a bank account, investments,
real estate,
and then the different types of liabilities. I think the most common nowadays is definitely student loans for most people,
credit card debt.
Exactly. Any type of loan that you're taking out.
Also, I would say liabilities include cars, like car debts.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And I actually said that cars are the most expensive liability you could own. But then someone pointed out to me saying, what about a boat? And I was like, yeah, you're right. A boat is actually more expensive than a car. So
let's just say vehicles are very expensive liabilities.
Yes.
Any sort of vehicle. I think what we like to preach is purchasing assets that generate income. I think a lot of us have read different books on these forms of different assets. One of them, of course, being, like we alluded to earlier, real estate, which can generate income through rental or appreciation, and then stock market investments as well, which can yield you dividends or year-over-year growth.
No, I definitely think I was just going to say that the classic book about assets versus liabilities is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So if you haven't read that book, that is where I encourage everyone to start. Just start reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Again, it's the best-selling personal finance book of all time. It really distinguishes between the two. Like, most people think that a house is an asset. Well, not all times, because if you end up spending, most of your income on the house, then it's considered a liability. It's only considered an asset if it's producing you income. Mm-hmm. There's some nuances to it, but again, we just want to make it simple, I guess. So an asset is what you own and a liability is what you owe, what Ryan alluded to. So
yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. For me, it was the first personal finance book that I read that made me interested in personal finance and made me thirsty and hungry to continue learning more. And I think it's a great first book for any listeners that are trying to find a first book to get into, because it's so easy to read. Mm-hmm. It's written in the format of a story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, it is that story, and it shows two different perspectives. It gives you the liabilities, the debt, and all that. So I think it's definitely one of the greatest books that I can recommend. But Ryan, I wanted to ask you, so obviously, going into debt, there's a lot of different ways of paying off debt. I know there's a famous way that Dave Ramsey coined is debt snowball versus debt avalanche. Can you explain that to the listeners real quick, just so they get an idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So the debt snowball is where you list all your debts from smallest debt to biggest debt, regardless of interest rate.
In size,
and then you make,
right. Mm-hmm.
So this is what Dave Ramsey really made popular. And then you make minimum payments on every single debt. And then any extra money you have, you throw out the debt with the smallest balance. And then whenever that's paid off, use whatever money you were paying there to throw at the next debt with the smallest balance. And then it kind of snowballs. And so psychologically, what it does is as you get these small wins when you pay off the smaller debts, it helps you stay motivated to pay off those other debts. Mathematically, though, it's not the best way to pay off your debt. That's the debt avalanche. The debt avalanche says, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to list all my debts, but I'm going to do it from highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. And so mathematically, the best way to pay it off is highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. The thing is, if you have a lot of high interest debt, but they're big balances, you're not going to see those wins very early in the debt payoff, journey. And so you might lose motivation. And so I think personally, when I was paying off my debt, I kind of did a hybrid. So I did a lot of the smaller debts first, like with my student loans. And then when I got closer to the bigger debts and they weren't too far off, I kind of did the higher interest rates there too. So I think both are effective. Ultimately, what it comes down to and what I tell people is use whichever method is going to help you stay motivated to actually pay off your debt. I don't think there's a clear answer as to which one is better. I found that probably more people like the snowball better, but I've also found people that are math nerds that are like, I can't do it. I have to do the avalanche. And so it's just whichever way works for you is what I typically recommend. So
Ryan, I have a question for you. When you were starting to pay off your debt, take your student loans, for example, were you making the minimum payment on those student loans, or were you trying to go beyond that to more aggressively pay down your loan?
So when I started paying it off, it was during the grace period. So I actually didn't have to pay anything. That was actually good. So I just started throwing as much money as I possibly could at it. I got on a budget, cut down, my expenses to nothing, kept living like a college student, got some side hustles and just threw as much money at it as I could. And I actually paid off like 90% of it before that grace period was up. So it was actually pretty easy. I didn't really have to worry too much about the minimum payments or anything like that.
Avoiding interest like a smart man.
Yeah, made it easy.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I love that story too. And I just want the listeners to get like a visualize again on the debt snowball and avalanche is like a snowball obviously starts small and builds up. So you start with your smallest balance, you get those wins, and then you roll it up to the bigger debts. And then with the avalanche, you start with the bigger ones first and it all comes down and you pick up speed pretty quickly. So just that's why it's called the snowball versus the avalanche. And like Ryan said, whatever works for you, as long as you're paying off debt, it's the good way to go. So
yeah, progress is key. As long as you're doing it is key.
For sure.
Yeah, speaking about creative ways of paying down debt, John, I know you recently purchased a duplex. Do you want to speak to the listeners a little bit about that process and how you're leveraging a tenant to pay down your debt?
Yeah, I can talk about that real quick. And I think that goes into another topic like good debt versus bad debt.
Exactly, yeah.
Essentially, good debt is debt that you take on where you can make more money from it. Basically what leverage is. And bad debt is obviously credit card debt, things that have high interest. But yeah, so I recently bought a duplex and it's a 2-unit house basically. So there's a unit on the bottom and a unit on the top. They're separated. So I live on the top unit while I rent out the bottom unit. So I did take out a mortgage for this, but I consider this good debt because I'm receiving rental income from the bottom tenant. So even though I take out debt, it's very low interest. It's actually 3.0 on the dot. Yeah, I took out a large debt and I'm receiving rental income from it. So that's a type of good debt, I would say.
I'll go ahead and say it. I'm getting a house in the next month, but I wouldn't consider it a good investment. So a house really is just a big expense unless you're generating income like John is. The way we kind of figured is we're already going to live, we want a house and we're willing to pay for it. And we're not going to consider it as an investment. It's going to be kind of like just an expense that we pay every month. It's our living expenses. So the biggest key here is that we're spending, a small percent of our monthly cash flow on this house so that we can actually build wealth through other ways like index funds. So that kind of transitions. If you're going to have rental real estate like John with house hacking or rental properties that you buy outright and rent out and generate cash flow, that type of real estate is good income producing real estate. your primary residence does not produce income, it's not a good investment. It will go up in value. It's kind of like a forced savings account as well. And it does appreciate. So it's not horrible, but the key is not to put all of your money into it, because that money could be generating a lot more money somewhere else.
And also, I just want to touch on that. So, I mean, if you're going back to Rich Dad Poor Dad, for my example, yeah, it's like
exactly.
when I'm renting out my house, it's producing income. So my house is considered an asset. Basically, it's that good debt. Just for
that
Ryan's
income generating asset, exactly.
Income generating asset, exactly. So. In Ryan's case, it's his primary residence. He's not generating income from it. Do you guys consider that a liability then, or is it?
So if you want to be like financially, like use the correct finance terms, the home is an asset, but the mortgage is a liability. But I don't consider it. At the end of the day, when it comes to our net worth, I can include it in there, but the bulk of it's going to be in other investments.
Yeah, and I would definitely include that equity in your net worth, that difference between your home value and how much you still owe on the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Greg, when are you? I was gonna say, Greg, when are you getting a house? It's you're up next, right?
Yeah, I'm in the process. I'm in New York, so everything's just so expensive here.
Actually, is New York real estate going down in value a lot?
So rental has aggressively. There's been a supply shortage as far as sales. So it hasn't declined as much as you would have thought. I mean, there's definitely been a pullback, but I think just nationally, what about your local markets for you both? Has there been an aggressive decline, or has there been a supply shortage that has kind of kept prices afloat?
There's been a huge supply shortage over here. Like we were building, and when we signed the papers in June, this was, I guess, when COVID was starting to get better, but the demand for lumber prices skyrocketed, and the supply of houses went down. Anyway, the price of our home, if we were to have bought it now, is like $50,000 more than it would have been, or it was in June, which is crazy, because there's been massive inflation this year because of the supply's just been down and the demand's extremely high. Right. I think part of that is interest rates are extremely low. Like I just locked in a 2.5% rate, which is the lowest it's ever been. So oh my God. It's crazy. Yeah. So.
And I think something else important to note as far as just house prices in general, real estate tends to be a lagging indicator compared to GDP, stock market performance. So we might not see true effects on, how the economy is doing on the real estate market for a little bit. But like we were saying, though, that I think that supply shortage is creating an inflation in prices. Not many people want to put their houses on the market right now because they know, there's a lot of uncertainty out of there. And I don't think many people want people touring their homes with amid this pandemic we're living in.
Yeah, there's a huge supply shortage here as well in the Midwest. People are outbidding everyone for every single house. So it's just, it's that supply and demand. So
yeah.
I just want to say one more thing about debt, if we can.
Sure.
Just the age-old question: do I pay off debt or do I invest? And so obviously, if you have high interest credit cards, if you have 10-20% interest, you want to pay off that debt as soon as possible before you even think about investing. But all you have is like a 2.5% mortgage, and that's all you have, then you should prioritize investing, in my opinion, just because you can get a better rate of return on your investment rather than paying off a 2% debt.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in the same boat. If your debt is generating income and appreciating, then don't prioritize paying that off over investing. So don't prioritize paying low interest home debt over investing in the stock market.
I think it kind of goes back to your Avalanche comparison. You want to pay off that high interest debt before and leverage your money or leverage your low interest rate debt to generate more income, right?
Yeah. Especially with interest rates at historic lows. Back in the, I think, 80s, interest rates were above 10%. So paying down your house actually was a better return than the stock market a lot of times. And so it made sense to pay down your house. But now that interest rates are nothing, it's almost free to borrow money. And so you might as well rent that money and make more money in the stock market.
Speaking about low interest rates, I'm curious, have you guys found any decent high yield savings accounts?
No.
I think Chime is still at 1%, but
Is it
Chime?
really? I've seen everything I've seen is below 1%.
It's tough. And we always stress the importance of having that 3 to 6 month emergency fund. You always want to keep that in high yield savings.
Speaking of emergency funds, I wanted to ask y'all a question about that. So given everything that's happened with COVID, we've been in this for what, 6 months at least?
Yeah.
7-8 months. So the traditional finance experts say, 3 to 6 months of expenses. I don't think that's enough. I think you need to have a minimum of 6 months.
I typically, when I'm talking to people, I personally like to keep 6 to 12 months of expenses, just because I like to keep things on the safer side. 3 months, if you lose a job, especially amid a pandemic, 3 months is not much time to find a job, and you're going to quickly burn through that. And that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I think, I personally keep 6 months, like basically right on the dot. I think it's tough for people to if you say 6 to 12 months, they think 12 months, and then it's like, oh my gosh, I need to have $50,000 saved. So I get where people have, obviously lower emergency funds, but I would say 6 months. I mean, you're sitting pretty at 6 months of emergency fund.
So what I tell people is to save up. So in my financial freedom steps, I say, save up 6 months, start investing. And then any extra money you have, you can build that up to a year slowly. So it doesn't have to happen right away, but you want to have that initial buffer pretty fast.
Right.
And over time, you can build it up and then have that, nice, comfortable year.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to have an emergency fund inhibit any sort of investment and real money growth, because then you're just saving cash after a certain point.
Yeah. And you also don't want to have too little, because then if something bad happens, then you take out debt or cash out your investments.
It's a balance for sure.
It's a balance,
Yeah. And I think, like we say, personal finance is personal. So to each individual, that number will be different. So let's do our simple money tips for the week. We will talk about debt.
Yeah. So your biggest asset is your income, your cash flow. That's what enables you to build wealth. So if you spend it all in the form of debt payments, it's going to hinder your ability to build wealth. So the number one personal finance rule that you'll hear anywhere is live on less than you make and invest the difference. It couldn't be simpler than that. So you have to avoid debt at all costs. And the best way to do that is to, live below your means, budget, don't compare yourself to others, and be grateful. So,
and I think to add on to that point, as your income increases, be careful with lifestyle increases as well.
Absolutely. That is a real thing.
That could be a whole nother podcast episode.
Why don't you, yeah. Why don't you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think for some people, you get this nice promotion, and then maybe you've been looking at a new car for a while.
Oh, you want to splurge for sure.
Or you maybe want to upgrade your home. So you splurge, you take out a large amount of debt, and then suddenly, you want to
same rate.
As Ryan was alluding to, the difference between your income and your expenses, you want that difference to grow over time. You don't want it to remain the same.
100%. Yeah. I'll give my simple money tip. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's from Dave Ramsey. He says, "Debt is normal, be weird." And I think that's just so funny, like, especially in America today. It's just like, debt is so normalized across everyone. You take out student loans, you take out a car loan, you take out a mortgage, you get into credit card debt. There's so many reasons to go into debt. It's just normal. Like, it's a normal thing that people do. But we're not normal. So we're not going to take on debt. We're going to, build our assets, build our cash flow. And we're going to spend less than we earned, like Ryan said. So we're
going to pay things with money.
Pay in cash. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Greg, did you have your simple money tip?
Yeah, so my simple money tip kind of goes right along the lines of that. As far as making monthly payments for things, a lot of companies are getting very clever with amortizing purchases over time. Look at iPhones, for example. A lot of people are taking out, well, I guess it necessarily wouldn't be a loan, but making monthly payments on an iPhone, thinking they can afford to upgrade every few years. Meanwhile, then that means they're going to be contributing monthly payments for close to the rest of their life on their new phones. Microsoft is also doing this with the new Xbox. They have a new feature where instead of purchasing an Xbox with cash, you can now make monthly payments for, I don't know what it is, maybe 3-4 years. So
It's just a subscription forever, you know.
yeah. And we're definitely trending towards a subscription-based model for everything. My point with all this is take a step back and look at the purchase price of an object. If you cannot afford to purchase a new iPhone or you cannot afford to purchase a new Xbox, you shouldn't be making monthly payments on them and committing to several years of that, just like a car, as Ryan was saying.
Yeah, and they go even smaller. Like I see people, they're financing or they're making monthly payments on AirPods. Like it's like, or $100 headphones are like, oh, it's only like $7 a month for the next year. I'm like, why not just buy it outright? Like just yeah, like you said,
Credit.
if you don't have the cash to buy it, you shouldn't be buying it.
Yeah, because then you're just committing to making payments for a long period of time. And that, like we were saying, you're making that gap between your income and how much you're paying off in your lifestyle even smaller.
Yeah, like 30K in credit card debt doesn't happen overnight. It happens over the course of a few years. People are like, I'm gonna get this thing here and there, and it's only 5, 10, 30, $100 a month. And then eventually they're 30K in debt and they're paying $1,000 a month of their cash flow toward these payments, and they can't invest, and they're in a bunch of debt and they can't build wealth. And so that's how it happens. It's slowly over time. And so if you avoid debt in the first place, you can use your income, which is your biggest asset, to be able to build wealth.
Yeah, I even see on Amazon sometimes now when you make purchase instead of paying it in a lump sum, you can spread out your costs over time.
Even like $20 items you can finance now. It's crazy.
Yeah,
you can
but
finance a dog too.
Can you really?
Yeah, I
That's
literally
like
I found
unethical, bro.
So I didn't ask, but I was like, what happens if you don't pay for the dog? Do they repossess the dog? Like, is it secured debt?
The dog, the bounty hunter coming after him.
Well, that's what they would do for a car, right? So do they not do it for the dog?
Yeah, what is a repo dog person like? What is that? What does that look like?
Probably very friendly, I would think.
Yeah.
That would be so sad. Someone's just like taking your dog away from you. Like, no.
I know. You're like halfway through your 5-year term and get your dog taken away. Oh man, that shouldn't be funny. Okay.
All right, but I think we're nearing the end of this episode. John, do you want to hit a couple recap points from this episode that we talked about debt?
Sure, yeah. So again, we talked about the debt snowball versus the debt avalanche, how you can pay off debt with using those two different tactics. We also talked about, good debt versus bad debt, whether you should take on good debt or pay off your bad debt, basically. Obviously, you want to pay off your high interest credit cards. Anything else? We talked about cars a lot too. So anything else?
Yeah, I think we also spoke about avoiding taking out loans for unnecessary purchases, keeping or trying to increase that gap between income and your lifestyle expenses just to continue to grow. And eventually, we'll talk more about investing money and the best ways to do that, but continue to fuel those investments. Ryan, do you want to say something more on that?
Yeah, avoiding a big house payment too, because that will hinder your ability to build wealth. So I think the big theme here is debt just takes away from your cash flow, which allows you to build wealth. So
takes away your freedom, honestly.
Yeah, it does.
And I think that is good for this episode. As always, I'm Greg, also known as the Daily Investor.
And I am John, also known as John E. Finance.
And I'm Ryan, the Money CEO on TikTok and the Real Money CEO on Instagram.
And we are the Simple Money Guys, making money simple for you. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you everybody for listening. As always, give us a follow on Instagram at The Simple Money Guys, subscribe to us on YouTube, and be sure to tune in because we have new episodes coming every week.